There's nothing like the sight of the sun shining off the Narrows. If you stand at the corner of Cabot and Goodview at around 9 a.m. on a clear day, it's like the sun is laying out a road of light, straight through the Atlantic. Now, I'm not a man who's, a fan of art and crap like that, but I calls that poetry. Not with words or with the sight of it, but with the shimmer. The light burning, bouncing straight from the water up into your eyes, the smell of the salt, the sound of the gulls wheeling and diving like mad, the taste of home. Well, it does something to you, boy. And that's what I remember most about town. St. John's is a special place. Cabot Street, Goodview, Lime, Carter's Hill, Livingston Street, the whole block. Filled with good people, hard people. Folks who weren't afraid to work or break their back doing it. Father worked down at the boats, gutting fish, hands on them like bricks, like sandpaper. Cut your skin if you'd so much brushed up against you. Tough as nails, Father was, boy. Tough as nails and good as gold, Mother'd say. He'd give you the shirt off his back, Michael, she'd say to you. Yes, I'd say, Mother, he'd give you the shirt off his back. But if you didn't give it back to him when he asked for it, he'd tear the face off you. Mother was Father's second time marrying. Never met the first. She was struck down by a streetcar down on Water Street. He's only with her a couple of years or so. Father never said much about her. Julia was her name, I believe. Hell, even I don't remember anymore. Mother, she was a card. Gertie they called her. Mother could make a pot of dough with her left hand and tan your arse with her right. Multi-talented she was. She was strong too, like an ox. Strong in her mind and in her hand. Of course, you had to be with Father in the house. They were an odd couple. God knows neither of them was perfect, but they raised me the best they could. Good Catholic boy. On paper, anyway. I met the wife Catherine at a church dance in 1913. She had on this red dress. And her hair was up then. And she had this smile. She had this smile that could just light up a room. Just start a fire with it. I walked right up to her. I was brazen, see? And I said, "Care for a scuff?" "Not with you, Michael Francis Kelly," she said. Clearly my name preceded me. But a few jokes later and a couple of well-placed compliments and a few nips of my flask, I had her out there. Boy, she could dance like she was born for it, She was right elegant. Unlike me, I was right not, We left the barn dance and found a patch of wood up there by the old farm up on the Merchant Road. And I fell in love that night. And as luck would have it, 9 months later, Henry was born. We knew, don't worry. Got married somewhere around the 4th month. Kath was embarrassed because she was showing during the wedding, but I said, to hell with it. Let him gawk, I said. It'll do some good to see what love is in action, I'll say this, though. I never knew what it meant to love until I saw my wife hold my boy in her arms. It overwhelmed me. I said to myself I'd do anything to keep him alive, even if it meant dying for it. The date was September 3rd, 1914 when I signed up. Henry was 5.5 months. Line went on for hours. Hundreds of us waiting to take our shot at the Germans, whatever a German was. We didn't know. Catherine knew. She always knew that I'd go if the chance came up. We talked about it. And when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. There was nothing for me in town. I had a son. I needed to be able to provide for him. And for Catherine. I didn't know how Mother and Father would take to it all. It was a job to say. It could go either way, really. After I told them I was signing up to go over, Mother must have cried for 2 days straight. I'm part of the first ones, man. There's 500 other fellas just like me. It's not like I'm going to be alone. Then started the month-long training camp in Pleasantville. Damn near killed us. Had us running for days, giving us big old kinds of rucksacks and stuffing them full of rocks. Now, boys, I'm 5'6", a little scrap of a thing. Granted, I'm not a sissy, but that was brutal. Me and the boys made out okay with the odd game of crib, scatter scrap in the mess hall, bunch of hooligans. We got paid pretty good, $1 a day. I took 80 cents of that and I put it away for Catherine and the boy, you know, just in case. The Florizel left for the war a week later. Mom and Dad, Catherine and Henry walked me down to the water. There were people everywhere. I've never seen so many people. A lot of boys were from the Bay, and they'd been staying in strangers' houses here in town. Now, no family to see them off or anything, but the size of the crowd down there by the boat that day was enough to put anyone at ease. Packed to the gunnels, oh man. And when we got down there, I turned to Father, and Dad shook my hand and nearly tore it clean off. Told me, don't go getting in any trouble. I won't, back. When have you ever known me to get in any trouble, Dad? He smiled, threw me a wink. Mom just hugged me, crying still. I hugged Kath with such might I almost popped her head off. I gave her one last sniff. She had some smell about her, boss. I mean, she was perfect, right? In every way, she was... I kissed the young fella on the cheek, and I made my way for the boat. And that was it. The last image I caught of Dad walking away with Mom and Catherine holding Henry there on the gangway, watching us get aboard. We went down to the bows of the boat and waited for her to lift anchor. And sure enough, she didn't. Florizel wasn't prepared for the trip. Never mind the Newfoundland government paying $36 per soldier and $54 for each precious officer aboard her. We were still stuck there in that boat, clung onto the dock for 24 hours. Couldn't leave. Stuck down there like a pack of meat you'd shove in an icebox or something. But on top of that, the fact that you'd have to be in there with the Protestant crowd and that Methodist bunch. Enough to drive you cracked. If I never see the Atlantic again, it won't be soon enough. That's not a pleasant voyage, boss, to say the least. By the time we made it to Salisbury Plain, I didn't know if I was punched or bored. Friggin' arseholes over there calling us Canadian. I'm about as Canadian now as a punch in the guts. Our face towards England, our back to the Gulf. Come near at your peril, Canadian wolf. The boys had a grand laugh at all the different accents over there. Canadians sure talk funny, but in the end, they were in the thick of it, just the same as us. Poor bastards. We left Salisbury early December 1914, headed out for Fort George in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, you want to talk about a crowd that talks funny? Sweet mother of God. Fort George was a breath of fresh air compared to what we had to go through in Salisbury. At least at George, we had a decent place to spend the night. I learned how to fire a gun at George. Before that, I'd always thought my father was the best shot I'd ever seen, but I'll tell you what, after 2 months in the Highlands of Scotland, I'm not far behind. 2 months later, we were on our way to Gallipoli. Imagine that, crowd of Newfoundlanders all the way over there. It's not like, it's not everybody back home gets to say they're seeing the world like that, right? Although it's a hell of a way to see it. 60 pounds of gear strapped to your back, running back and forth a trench full of bullet casings and fellas just trying to get home. I killed my first Hun at Gallipoli. He was creeping over the trench and I took my .303 and I buried a bullet straight through his head. Pop of the rifle, the red mist. He was quiet to death. It's like it wasn't anything. It's like snuffing out a candle only from a couple of 100 feet away in a trench full of rain and piss. He was looking straight at me too. It was almost like he was smiling at me. His big old grin he had on his face. And I remember thinking, what the hell are you smiling at, buddy? Nobody should be smiling here. They gave me a promotion for that. Killing that German, a couple of dozen more. Got a prize for it. Lance Corporal Michael Francis Kelly, killer of the Hun. Didn't even sound right saying it out loud. Promotion also got me the hell out of Gallipoli. And I was glad. Trenches were disgusting. I mean, the smell of death and fuel and everything else. And once we landed in France, I was promoted to sergeant on June 9th. Boys riled me for a couple of nights. And they were good lads, you know. Even the dirty prods, black as they were. It was all a little quick for me. No time to think about anything. You know, on to the next deployment. And we were in a stalemate with the Germans. The Brits were getting antsy, I guess, and wanted to make changes, I suppose. Anyway, we were always the last to know, so... The order come down that we were going to start the advance towards the Somme Valley, towards Beaumont Hamel. 2 weeks later we arrived. and we started pelting the Germans with every piece of artillery we could muster. 1,732,873 shells were fired in 1 week alone. Fritz was getting unloaded upon by a bunch of homesick soldiers who wanted nothing to do with trenches anymore. The idea was to destroy the front lines of the barbed wire trenches that the Germans were dug into. What we didn't know was that many of our shells were off the mark or didn't explode. The offensive had little effect on the German lines. Our assignment on the first day was simple. Take over the trenches near Hamel. Us Newfoundlanders were to empty our support trenches and bring it up to the 86th and 87th Brigade. Seemed simple enough at the time. And then all of a sudden, boom. 7:20 a.m., July 1st. I heard the loudest noise I ever had thought possible. It cut through the humming drone of bullet fire, the sound of 18,500 kilograms of explosives planted in Hawthorne Ridge near enemy strongpoints. After the explosion, the brigades had 10 minutes to reach the crater left by the explosions. The Germans were ready for us, though, and by the time the brigade reached the ridge, it was already too late. If you stopped at that moment and listened, the noise from the guns could have woke the world. The silence that followed could have done the same. We were all terrified because we knew that we were next. The trenches by that time were filled with bodies and the wounded. We couldn't move. And that's when the order came to forget about the trench system and to move over land. No man's land, they called it. 250 meters of open space. That's all we needed to travel through. However, the barbed wire was cut too small. You couldn't get through easily. You'd had to crawl over the dead to get out. I made sure the men were ready, the packs tightened, trench ladders in hand, tin triangles fastened to their packs. I stood with my men in a line, and I looked at each and every one of them, and I saw the faces of their families, and I saw my family. Mom, Dad, Catherine, little Henry. I told them we'd be all right. I said, we can make it to the other side, and we all have a shot at those Germans, eh? I was the first to get hit. Right shoulder tore me back onto the ground. And then it was another, after another, after another, after another. Young men crying out. I couldn't move. I just closed my eyes and thought about that red dress. I thought about her hair. The smell of her. The farm on the merchant. I thought about Henry. How he'll never have a dad to scrape his hands like sandpaper. I thought about Mom and Dad. Mom with her pot of dough and Dad mucking around with his clapboard or something. I lay there in the heart of France as it burned with German machine gun fire. And I saw the sun shimmer between the narrows. I smelled the salt of the water. Listened to the gulls dance beautifully above the harbor and tasted a memory of home. And then nothing. Nothing but a long, profound silence.